Hello, Justin.
Hey, Justin.
Hello. And I mean, I just want to address the elephant in the room right now. If
Yeah.
Jeff, if this AWS thing doesn't work out for you, like infomercials might be, I mean, either that or there may even be like a transition here into like quick change. Because if you did that live, you changed out of that suit really quick. And that's like magician level status right there. So you may want to think about it.
The magic of television, and appreciate your support.
I was looking for the number. I was like, if I was up late and I saw you show up on my TV, I'd be all over that.
I guess I've watched too much TV when I was younger.
You weren't shouting enough, though. I mean, if you wanted to like really push it home, you had to like get in my face a little more.
All right, next time. Well, here's the book again. Where we go? There we go. Get that on.
All right,
screen,
Justin. Thank you for joining us today. Can you, first of all, tell us who you are and what do you do for AWS?
Yeah, I'm a developer here at AWS. I work in the containers team at Amazon, which is a lot of different services that we provide, EKS being one of them. There's also ECS and App Runner, and there's a ton of things in this space that as Amazon and AWS, we provide to customers to get going in a lot of different ways. Specifically today, I want to talk about the launch of EKS Anywhere this week. But I did want to like take a step back from that because I don't know everyone watching the stream if we're on the same level playing field of like what's a container, like why is this valuable? Like,
yes,
I want to start there.
Yeah, that's a great start. Like, take us through containers and Kubernetes and why were they invented and what problems do they solve and how do they help our users?
Yeah, and I love to associate that with things that have existed in the past. So let's just pretend I'm a developer, and let's also pretend that it's, I don't know, mid 90s, right? Like this is like 1995, and I have software that I wrote that I want someone to use. Like how does that work? And I actually went into my bucket of stuff and pulled out the OG container right here. And Jeff, you might recognize this. Like this isn't the save icon. This is actually like where we put stuff. Like this was a container. This is how we ship software. As a developer, I said, hey, I need someone else to use this. And at the time, you know, internet wasn't really like, it was around, but no one was really on it. Like software shipped on these containers. And yeah, they're read-write, but you don't really want to write to them. They're pretty slow. And they're pretty limited in what they can do. But this was how like I copied files to this and I sent it to a store, I handed it to a friend and they plugged it in and they ran it. And in a lot of ways, like this was how software got distributed. It was these box software, and it was, as a developer, I couldn't touch it again necessarily. Like once I went to the store, like that's, if I needed to make an update, like I had to let me get another one, right? Like here's another, like, oh, here's version 2. And like, this is how that process had to work. And with containers, like modern containers, we turned all that into software, right? Once we realized that like, hey, this workflow of I develop something, I can give it to someone and I know it'll work the way that I wrote it. But once I got, 2 of them, I got 3 of them. I actually don't have any more here. But once we start to scale as a software, this doesn't work so well because then it's like, how do I distribute this? In the 90s, it was more people. We distributed that. We had people that actually orchestrated, right? Like they actually were plugging this into machines and said, hey, my old computer needed to run this. So that's how that works. So as a developer,
they'd have to drive around and go to the place to plug it in.
It was very expensive.
How do you know local if you do that? Yeah.
And now
and you also had to ship all your dependencies on there as well. Your libraries, your DLLs, whatever.
Exactly. Like that was, you bundled everything that it took to make your software run into one of these and you shipped it to people. And now that entire supply chain is software. And that's what containers are. Like it's the same workflow. It's the same enablement of developers shipping software to do that workflow. And you don't have to drive around. You don't need boxes. You don't need physical media. And so in that case, a lot of the people using your software are using it through a web interface. Websites, it's something that's hosted in AWS, and they say, oh, I don't need to like physically go get something to run an app on my computer. I can download that or I can use it through the web. And that's, containers can run in those contexts, and it helps developers build software faster and have a lot of those assurances that my software that I wrote is going to run here on my local machine where I wrote it, but also on someone else's machine, on 1 or 2 web servers, on 1,000 web servers, whatever it is they needed. So the tools and the services that AWS provide, ECS, EKS, App Runner, those are all ways to run these containers. I packaged my software, I put it in a container, I shipped it to a store. In this case, it's called a registry. And then that server ran the container. It said, okay, I'm going to take that thing and I'm going to pull that down and run it. And that's how I'm able to make sure I can get the software, that same workflow. Again, it's just ship it to a store, download it and run it.
So to be technical, those were 3rd generation floppy disks that you showed there. But how did we get from that point to the era of containers and Kubernetes? What other interesting things happened along the way?
Plenty of other software packaging mechanisms have come out. There's been RPMs and debs. There's zip files. There's a lot of other ways just to make that as like a software thing of like, hey, let's put this software in something that we can send to someone and verify, and even sign it and have a certificate to like make sure that it came from the right place. Like all those things advanced over the last 20 to 30 years to give us more assurances, make it happen faster. And those are all, add-ons on top of these sort of physical media.
Sure.
So we've mentioned Kubernetes a couple times. Can you actually tell us what it is?
Kubernetes is, again, it's the end place that your containers run. It's how we orchestrate that at scale to be able to say, hey, I don't have 3 of these floppy drives. I have 1,000 of them, and I need to run them. And it may be your infrastructure or your application has a lot of different dependencies, has a lot of different pieces. It might be microservices. It might need different hardware, such as a GPU. And so Kubernetes allows all of that software, all the bits of software, the containers, to go to the right places, to run in the right ways as you define it in some sort of definition of saying like, hey, this piece of software needs an ARM CPU, so I need to run on Graviton or something like that. And that's the basics of Kubernetes is doing that. Kubernetes is open source. Kubernetes has been around for a little while. You can get involved in the community. You can run it yourself. With EKS, we host that for you in AWS. EKS Anywhere, which launched this week, now allows you, like that's big news, now allows you actually to take all of the things we've learned of running EKS for years and run that in your data center and say, hey, I might need some help. Kubernetes is actually kind of complex. It does take a lot of technology to make this mostly seamless for your users. And so EKS Anywhere packages up a lot of open source. We have another tool or another open source project called EKS Distro, which is our bits that we run EKS in AWS. EKS Distro is like the pieces of Kubernetes you need that now can run on-prem. And we enable that in a couple of different ways. You can run it locally on your laptop if you want to just try it out and say, hey, let me see what this is all about. Or if you have vSphere on-prem, you can deploy a fully production and supported cluster into vSphere and deploy your software there. So if you have an on-prem environment, that's a great way to boost your utilization of vSphere and allow your developers to get this sort of new workflow of shipping and deploying containers into Kubernetes on-prem.
Okay, so I think I get it. So we're making it much easier for our customers to run their Kubernetes-based apps, and we've given them the ability to run that in the AWS cloud. And now you're saying if there's reasons for them to do it elsewhere, they can actually do that. What kind of reasons are you actually hearing from our customers? Why would they not always find AWS the place to run their Kubernetes apps?
So I first ran Kubernetes on-prem about 4 years ago. I was working at a company that did a lot of on-prem rendering for movies, and all of the artists were in the building. All of the art that they drew stayed in the building, and all of the compute for that stayed in the building. It was latency sensitive. We had a lot of security around that. We had a lot of need to say, hey, the art is being created here. It's expensive to move terabytes and petabytes of data back and forth between places. So why don't we bring the compute closer to where the artists are? And so my very first Kubernetes cluster that I created on-prem took me about 3 months to build. It was not the prettiest thing. It wasn't supported by anyone. It was essentially up to me and a small team of people to support and deploy things to it. But we wanted to enable some workflows to our internal developers to say, hey, just because we're on-prem doesn't mean you shouldn't have the benefits of what AWS and dynamic infrastructure provide. And so by looking at Kubernetes and saying this is an open source solution, we can run and support it ourselves if we want. EKS Anywhere shortens that by factors of I don't know how much, because instead of 3 months, it should take you about 20 minutes to get a production quality Kubernetes EKS cluster inside of vSphere. And if you have critical business running on that, you can pay for support from Amazon. If you're already using Amazon Enterprise, you can say, hey, you know what, like I actually need to make sure that this doesn't go down and we don't, you know, lose money or dedicate people to it. So Amazon support is absolutely available. And we have a lot of partners. Amazon works great within the community and with a lot of different companies for a lot of things that you might have on-prem, such as storage, such as load balancers, such as GitOps workflows. So we've partnered with a lot of other companies. We have a network overlay called Cilium, which is provided by Isovalent, which is a company. We have a GitOps workflow provided by Weaveworks called Flux. And these are all solutions that some companies and some environments will need to really take advantage of Kubernetes out of the box, because Kubernetes, we're making provisioning Kubernetes easy and then adding those supported integrations to it so that anyone can say, hey, actually, you know what, like Kubernetes is great, but I need this other piece and I need this other thing over here and I need these other areas. And so we're able to really bring in all of our wealth of integrations and our partner networks to be able to support those things.
Okay. So at this point, customers have a lot of choices of how and where to run their container-based workloads. How do we give them the big picture or the roadmap or the decision trees so they can make a really well-informed choice as to how to move forward?
If you have on-prem and you, especially if you have disconnected environments, I mean, I'm a big fan of Kubernetes. I also have a lot of ECS experience. I've done ECS in various ways, and EKS Anywhere works for on-prem workloads, but it's a slightly different model where if you have a network disconnection, if you have, you know, only on-prem or you want to take advantage of the Kubernetes ecosystem, EKS Anywhere is probably going to be a great fit. If you have workloads in ECS in AWS already, EKS Anywhere could fit as well. If you're fully in Amazon and nothing on-prem, you're welcome to pick from a variety of different choices, depending on how much shared responsibility you want to have. Do you want to run a control plane? Do you want to manage load balancers? Do you want to manage integrations? Like how much flexibility do you need and how much control do you need? And those are just a back and forth that always depends per customer.
You know, I was trying to do the math in my head and I couldn't, but you mentioned moving a petabyte of data back and forth for a rendering workstation. How many floppy disks would that be?
It's about a snowball. So
better answer.
Yeah.
So with this, this is a GA release, right? General availability. What is involved with it? We've got a couple of questions on what is actually supported. So can you touch on that a little?
Yeah, for sure. It's an open source tool, so you don't have to be an AWS customer to use EKS Anywhere, which for me, coming from multiple environments, having an open source tool that lets me use it and try it and see if it fits before I sign a contract or talk to anyone in sales, like that's a big benefit to engineering, to be able to say like, hey, I just want to run this and try it. I'll know within half a day if it's the thing that I need. And that's great because you can run it. We spend a lot of time on the getting started documentation on run it locally. If you have a vSphere environment, go ahead and try it there. Currently at GA, vSphere is the only supported production cluster targets. So we have a model here for different providers where you can run a cluster. Right now it's vSphere. We wanted to start with what we saw a lot of customers had and what we saw a lot of environments on-prem had. And vSphere was in a lot of them. It was just a good bar that we could set at and say, hey, a lot of people want to use vSphere. Let's target that because we can enable a lot of customers right off the bat. But we have other options coming next year. Bare metal is the next one on our list. And so if you have no VMs, but you just want to use raw machines and you say, hey, whatever reason, I don't have vSphere or I don't have VMs, bare metal will be able to support that, where we can say, hey, you can just bring me a rack of actual hardware and point EKS Anywhere at it and say, hey, I want that to be a Kubernetes cluster now. And that's the goal of saying, yeah, we can absolutely make that a Kubernetes cluster that is supported. And then at GA, we're also enabling this support model where if you are an AWS customer, you can pay us for support and we will support everything inside of EKS Anywhere as the tooling and a lot of any of the integrations that are in it that we support. There's in the documentation, there's a lot of call outs for what is supported, things like network overlays and some storage and different things that you'll need for your workloads. You call AWS if you have a problem with them. And we have a great team of engineers working on this tool in the open. It's already out there. You can see as work and pull requests are happening. We have issues out there of customers already asking for new things and pull requests to add new features already, which is amazing. That's why I love open source, because it just makes some of that visibility for customers so much easier, where it's not like I don't have to call my TAM who has to go call the engineer who has to go call the PM or something like that. Like that trade-off shrinks a lot for customers in open source. And I love that aspect.
That's really great to hear that we're so involved in listening to our customers and responding to what it is that they need. What are the best ways for our customers to actually really get as engaged as possible with the open source aspect of this?
Absolutely. Look at the GitHub repo. I think I saw links to it in the chat already. So that's one place to start. If you actually want to get involved more with what we're doing with the tool, we've been working inside of the larger Kubernetes community for months now. There's what's called special interest group that focus on different things. And so we use current tools that were already in the open source Kubernetes community, such as Cluster API and Kind, and I'm blanking on some of them right now, but they have special interest groups that if you go look at the Kubernetes community, they list them all out and they have weekly or bi-weekly calls. And a lot of the EKS Anywhere engineers are sitting in those calls, helping those projects get better, committing resources and time back to push any changes, any of the benefits that we see upstream, so we can say, hey, the entire Kubernetes community can benefit from this. We're going to use it in this productized version of it called EKS Anywhere, which again is also open source, but it makes some decisions for you, and it helps you get along a supported path that if you're just starting out with Kubernetes is actually kind of hard. There's a lot of decisions to make. There's a lot of software. There's a lot of things in the ecosystem. And by making some of those decisions up front, we can help you accelerate your Kubernetes adoption and your containers adoption.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, this sounds great. Can you show it to us in action?
Yeah, absolutely. I have my, if we want to pull up my screen, actually, let me get a quick drink.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll add it.
Go ahead. It should be there.
Okay.
This is my demo application that I wrote for EKS Anywhere. So it's literally just a couple config files for Nginx. And so again, as a developer, I might build this software locally on my machine. I need to ship it now. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is package this somehow in a container. And that's like the bar. If you want to get into Kubernetes, put your software in a container, and then we can talk from there. So what I did already was I took this application, I packaged it up as a container, and I deployed it to a registry. So it's up here in the ECR public gallery, which is our public registry. So anyone can pull this image down and run my amazing software of my application. It's in our EKS getting started example. So go ahead and run through that. But this is the app I'm going to run. So the only thing I need to do is create a cluster. And I'm not going to go through the whole cluster creation workflow. Definitely check out the docs if you want to do that. But EKS Anywhere is a subcommand of this tool called EKS Control. And it has these options for creating a cluster, deleting a cluster, upgrading a cluster, and also generating like support bundles and those sorts of things if you need to get the support. So the first thing I did was I have that container. It's published in ECR registry, and I just need to deploy it. And this, again, it's an on-prem Kubernetes cluster. There's nothing special about it. So all the standard Kubernetes tooling works. So if I do git nodes, I already provisioned a cluster here locally on my machine, and you can see it has Docker at the front of it. And so this is provisioned in a Docker environment. So this is a local cluster, and those are 2 nodes inside this Kubernetes cluster. And I can create this application. Actually, let me show you this spec real fast. So this is when you're deploying a Kubernetes application. This is that container that I showed you earlier. That's the thing that's in ECR. So that's all of my software. Everything else in here is just options on how I want it to run, how I want it to look. So I give it a name when it's running in EKS. I tell it how many replicas. And down here, I tell like what port it should be open on. So I can say, hey, if I'm going to try to get information from that, look at port 80. And so some of this is optional. It was just part of the example, and it was just something we wanted to do. So thank you. I can deploy that. Actually, I think I still have it deployed because I was working on it earlier. So it's running inside my cluster. I can see that I have one container that was already deployed. It's running. That's the name of it that I wanted. And I already actually am publishing that on my local port because I'm doing it. So I can curl. And I can see my wonderful application with all of the glorious ASCII text, because that's the way the web should be browsed. But that's my application in Kubernetes. So the benefit here, and again, this isn't much different than these floppies here. The benefit here is that portability, the container portability of saying, hey, I want this to run somewhere else. I want this in a different environment. And that's where it's actually really cool, because EKS on-prem with EKS Anywhere allows you to take the same container image and everything about it and then say, hey, actually, no, I want to put this in Amazon now. I want this to be hosted in EKS. I want it to be dynamically scalable. Whatever the need is, you can do all that. So I'll switch my tabs here. And I'm in a different Kubernetes cluster. So you can see here, I have these US West 2. This is a node inside of a different Kubernetes cluster. The only thing I did here was actually changed the config file that I'm using kubectl to call to. So I say, hey, instead of using my local cluster, go point at the one I created in Amazon. And I can do the exact same steps. The workflow is the same, which is why the container portability and Kubernetes running anywhere is so powerful.
The same people can be managing, whether it's in AWS or whether it's on-prem.
Yeah, the same workflows for deploying applications and running applications. The one change I'm doing here is I have a slightly different spec that I'll show it off. The only thing I do here is right down here, I say my service is a load balancer now, because in Amazon, in AWS, we have dynamic load balancers, and we can provision that, and we know how that works. On-prem, especially on my local laptop, it turns out I don't have a load balancer on my local laptop. So I can't do it that way, but I can provision one in AWS. And I get all the same stuff about what port it should be on, everything else. So if I apply this one, the load balancer, again, I had it running already, but I could do get services. And I can see, here's my hello EKSA service, and here's my actual load balancer. Like I didn't have to do anything for that except for change a word inside my YAML file. The image is the same, the software is the same, everything about this deployment is the same, which is that portability aspect. And so again, I can curl this, and ta-da, it's the same
thing.
The same thing. If you really notice, like I defined as a dynamic piece in here of like what the app is called. So that is different between the two, where this one's on my local machine and that's in the AWS. And so that's the portability that as developers, you can run things on-prem, workloads that are data sensitive, for either restrictions based on whatever it is you're trying to, if you have government mandates, if you have latency concerns, if you have a disconnected environment, like these are the things that we want to enable customers to do and run Kubernetes and have all those same benefits. And a lot of the management of Kubernetes, especially with EKS Anywhere, shifts. Instead of managing servers and trying to upgrade them, it's a declarative method of saying, hey, just like I have a spec here for how my app is deployed. I have a spec for how my cluster is deployed. And so my cluster actually gets deployed the exact same way as my applications. And we have an integrated GitOps tool called Flux, which if you just deploy the new version of it, it actually can upgrade your cluster for you. And it can do some things. And if you want to scale it, or if you want to change types of the nodes you have, memory and CPU, you can do that all through this declarative spec. And you push it just like I pushed this application. And so that is super powerful, that we're enabling infrastructure engineers to do the same thing applications engineers have been doing, whether that's on-prem or in AWS.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice.
I think what's interesting here is your demo really only featured one container, right? Which,
yep.
But like, this is all so that you can scale and so that it's more dynamic, being able to do this, correct?
Yeah, I mean, anything in Kubernetes that you normally would get with dynamic scaling, with horizontal pod auto-scaling, with node auto-scaling, all of those things, it's still EKS and EKS Anywhere is a Kubernetes cluster. And we want to enable anyone that wants to use Kubernetes to take advantage of everything in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And we're not, having some special sauce on like, oh, if you do it this way with Amazon, like this is the thing you get. It's like, no, like this is a Kubernetes cluster. We vend these to you so you can be successful with whatever tools you want. This whole time we've been talking about open telemetry and managed Grafana. All those tools work inside a Kubernetes environment. It's great. They integrate with a Kubernetes cluster, whether you're running it yourself or you're running EKS. And in both these cases, you can hook up an EKS Anywhere cluster to CloudWatch and Managed Grafana and get visibility into the cluster.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So our viewers, if they'd like to get started, what do you recommend as their first step?
Check out the documentation. Let me switch my tab again. Oh, too many windows. And my camera's blocking me. There we go. So check out the documentation, anywhere, eks.amazonaws.com. We have a getting started guide right here. The big old button right there. Just click the blue button, and it starts you right with install the tool and create a local cluster. Create the local environment, which is what I have running on this machine, and it'll give you a sense of what's involved in that cluster. If you want to actually come see a full cluster creation demo and cluster management, we have a show called Containers from the Couch that we have a show on Monday that we'll be doing a full demo of. Let's deploy a cluster, let's upgrade the cluster, let's look at some of the more advanced features of what it takes to manage an EKS Anywhere cluster. So I'll drop that link in the chats. I don't know if we should probably send that to the other one. So I'll put it over here in private chat too. But that's a great, we're trying to show off a little more advanced on just like what it means to manage an EKS cluster and more details about how it helps the cluster admins, because the Kubernetes aspects of that get a little bit tricky. So we want to spend a full hour on taking questions and talking to people.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Justin. This has been great. I know there's been a lot of excitement. I saw a bunch of stuff, people talking about this on Twitter yesterday. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great to be able to talk to anyone that wants to hear about Kubernetes on-prem.
Yeah, and so that we can see floppy disks again. It's been a while.
I'll always bring floppies.
Yeah. All right, everyone.
I think how hard I'd have to scrounge around my house to find a floppy. I have some really old boxes of career memorabilia, and I have to dig like a decade back, I think, to find a floppy disk at this point.
Yeah.
It took me about 10 minutes. I knew roughly where they were.
All right. So before we end today, I'm going to remind you again that we need your feedback. The survey, there's a link in chat that we would love for you to fill out. I forgot to mention this earlier, that the first, I think it's 50 people who submit that survey have a chance to get some AWS credits. So please do that. Again, your feedback really helps us improve the show and improve our products as well. So please do that. Jeff, is there anything else you want to add today before we wrap this up?
I can't think of anything, Jenna. It's been really, really fun to put this together.
Yeah.
And I love watching all the questions on the chat. I love to see that we've got this global audience. It's really, really cool that we've got people tuning in from pretty much all over the world. And really appreciate everybody's time and attention and great questions, and hope that they've found this a really good use of their time.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that we have the ASL interpreters here too. So thank you, Genesis and David. Your help your work is very much appreciated by us and by the audience.
Absolutely.
I took a little bit of ASL in college, and so I know this much of it. And so I've been watching and trying to remember as much as I can.